the winner wasn't deserving of the MVP, but that pissed me off. And I finished second a lot in my career, either from a championship and now 4 times as the MVP. It's a weird thing sometimes that I don't know how much we are really watching the game of basketball, or are we just in the narration mode, the narrative. I mean, I'm fine. Don't get it twisted. Like, I'm going back to my room, I'm perfectly fine. Like, I was pissed off at the reaction earlier when I saw it. I'm absolutely great now. I'm going back to my room, drink some wine, and sleep very well tonight. So let's not get it twisted. I'm great.
Don't get it twisted. He's got the wine. Welcome back to The Jump. I'm Rachel Nichols, still here with Ramona Shelburne, Richard Jefferson. Those were LeBron's remarks after finding out he was runner-up to Giannis for MVP this season. It was the 4th time in his 17-career career he has finished up as runner-up, tied with Jerry West and Larry Bird for most all time. So, Ramona, you voted for LeBron James. Does he have a point about awards voting?
Yeah, he does. And look, I'm one of the 16, okay? And last time we talked about this, I made the mistake that my friend Tony Reale on Around the Horn always mutes me for, right? He docks me points on Around the Horn when I use the word narrative, okay? And I think LeBron's using the word narrative wrong.
I was going to say, he's the narrative, right? Isn't he the narrative in this situation?
He's the narrative, right? He's the narrative. He's the one with the story. Giannis is actually not the narrative. Giannis is the statistical winner. By every statistical measure, Giannis should have won. Giannis was the best player, the most valuable, all of that. If you want to get into that, I look at the totality of LeBron's contributions this year. I gave him points for leadership. I gave him credit for taking a team that had been out of the playoffs for 6 years to the #1 seed in the Western Conference, for integrating with Anthony Davis. Those seem to be big. That takes a lot, and that's why I voted for LeBron. He led the league in assists at age 35, played a new position at point guard. Giannis, to me, had a spectacular season. I voted for him last year. This is not personal, but let's talk a little bit about the broader scheme of awards voting.
Oh, yes.
There are a lot of awards voters. Yeah, okay? There are a lot of voters. There are over 100 people who vote for MVP. And I knew when I voted for LeBron that I was going to be in the majority this year. Sorry, in the minority this year. Of course, everybody had written their columns. It was talked about openly. You knew that if you were going to vote for LeBron, you were going to be in the minority. And so you knew you would have to defend your vote. I think there is some pressure not to there is some pressure to just kind of go along with what everybody else is going to vote for. So he does have a point there. I agree with him on that there is some pressure to just vote for whoever, you read Zach Lowe's column, or you read, John Hollinger's column, or you read whoever's column that you read, and maybe you read 10 of them. You study your own numbers, whatever you do to do your voting. But that's why there are 100-something voters, okay? 101 voters, right? The NBA does this on purpose. There's radio broadcasters, there's analysts, there's former players, there's beat writers, there's columnists, because we all have differences of opinion, and collectively you will come out with who should win the award. Now, I do think he has a point that there is pressure to go along with the herd. I do think that he has a valid point there.
Now, look, I understand everything that everybody is saying. And I feel bad because it's kind of like when you have those MJ versus LeBron conversations, because it's like, well, by saying one is better, it's like you're trying to demean the other. We're not trying to say that Giannis didn't have an amazing season. That's not the conversation. We're not trying to say, most people would say, look, Giannis would be second at worst. But ultimately, Giannis might not care about these things now. But when Giannis is 31 years old and he's having seasons that are just as good as the one he's having, but because there's somebody newer and younger and shinier coming along, and that person had a historic season, now all of a sudden his accomplishments at a much later age, and that should have, in my opinion, that should be accounted for. When you're doing things at an age that have never been done, when you're doing things in your career that have never been done. That was one thing that somebody pointed out to me that had never taken place. LeBron James literally led the NBA in assists for the first time in his career, and he's at 17 years. Why? Because his team needed him to do that, right? And that was something that was magnificent. When you look at Giannis, he was great, but all he did was just consistently improve on what he did last year. Not necessarily added something to his game. His free throw percentage didn't go up. His three-pointer was not effective, especially we saw that late game. So I understand why everyone's frustrated. I understand why Bron is frustrated. I understand why Giannis fans are like, what are you talking about? It's just weird the way we're going about this, and there needs to be an adjustment in it because Giannis had a great statistical season, but I don't know if he was the best player in basketball last year.
He was, I mean, that is, of course, what poor Ramona has now heard me say for 5 straight years. That is the question, right?
Yeah.
That is the point. That is the inflection point we're at. And frankly, it is even more of an issue now than it was when I started talking about this 5 years ago, because with every year, the statistical pressure of all of that has gotten so great because we have more statistics. We have more access to games, actually. When I started covering the NBA, you got a game of the week on national television, and that was kind of it. And people saw Michael Jordan a million times and all of that. Now we have access to all the tape of every single game, every stat imaginable. And you're talking about, Richard, LeBron's context of, hey, he did this in this season, or Giannis didn't add this to last season. Again, right now, that is not what they tell you to vote on. And they don't give you the most clear instructions, but they do say it's supposed to be on this particular regular season. Not in comparison to his previous seasons, not about what he might do in the playoffs, not about who is the best player. It is about what a guy did with the stats for this season. And I have said over and over again, I think it is a mistake as we have gone through the last 3.5 decades without modernizing the major awards in this league, to not have a distinction between who had the most outstanding statistical season, however you want to put it, best season, most outstanding season this season, versus who's the best player in the NBA. And I think that is a lot of what LeBron James was frustrated with. Right? It was like, y'all know I'm the best player in the NBA still. But that's not what the award is for right now. It drives me
I'll go back to
crazy.
This. Shaquille O'Neal was the most dominant man on the planet for like 10 to 12 seasons.
Yeah.
Most dominant man. It wasn't even close. And I believe he has 2 MVPs. And I feel like that part is something that, again, who is the best player in the league versus who is having the best statistical seasons.
Well, and here's, by the way, Kobe and LeBron were the flip-flop of this back in, I think, 2009. Ramona, you're going to be no chapter and verse on this, that Kobe was considered the best player in the NBA in 2009. LeBron won the award because he had the best stats that season. So he has been the beneficiary of this conundrum, and now it is working against him. And I would just, again, urge the NBA to consider modernizing the awards so that we can make a distinction between who had the best season versus, hey, who do we think is the best player in the NBA this year? And by the way, that can change from year to year, because if we had those 2 awards, I would have given best player in the NBA this year, last season, to Kevin Durant, right? He had a more of like, man, he's the best player in the league this season last year. This year, I would give that to LeBron James, hands down. But the best statistical season went to Giannis. I just, again, think that there can be a differentiation. All right. Before we go to break, I do want to address something from this past weekend. So I talk sometimes about the women of the NBA, and often someone will try to correct me and say, you mean the WNBA? And I'll say, no, I mean the NBA. Yes, what you see on your TV when you watch the NBA is men playing basketball. But in every corner of the sport, there are women, all through the league office, team front offices, training staffs, coaching staffs. And none of them, me included, would be able to do the jobs we do the way we do them if it wasn't for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Honestly, if you are an American woman who appreciates not having to ask your father or husband for permission to manage your own finances, property, health, you owe a gigantic debt to the notorious RBG, something the WNBA recognized with a lovely video tribute before its playoff game last night. So it was surprising then, and disappointing, frankly, when the NBA chose not to do the same. Despite that it was just last month the league held such meaningful moments of silence for not just politician and civil rights icon John Lewis, but actor Chadwick Boseman. If you are a league that holds equality as a core value, and I know for sure that this league does, the icons of that equality can't just be those who helped the men that we all see on TV, but those who paved the way for the women who work right alongside them. After all, the NBA is significantly stronger because of all the women who work in and around it. And we are all significantly stronger because a young lawyer dedicated her life to allowing us to have those opportunities. So thank you, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I don't know how much basketball you watched, but I know you had a hand in making our game better.